Aegis 9 was humanity's last desperate foothold in the far reaches of space, a colony precariously balanced between survival and destruction. Established on the ruins of an ancient Zaltari world, it was a frontier settlement unlike any other, a, say, fusion of human engineering and alien biotechnology, where steel and circuitry intertwined with living structures that pulsed with eerie organic light. It was a city of contradictions. The human settlers, explorers, scientists, and corporate operatives sought to push the boundaries of knowledge and commerce, eager to exploit the remnants of Zaltari technology. The Zaltari, a species of elegant yet secretive biotechnological architects, had allowed the humans a foothold only under strict conditions. The truce between them was tenuous, forged from necessity rather than trust. Though the colony thrived, unease hung over Aegis 9 like a specter. From a distance, the cityscape was mesmerizing. Towers of steel and glass stood defiantly against the sky, but between them, strange shifting structures of Zaltari design swayed as though responding to an unseen force. The pathways of the colony were lined with a blend of human electrical grids and Zaltari energy veins that shimmered in an ever-changing, bioluminescent dance. No one fully understood how they functioned, only that they did. But the air was heavy with tension. The humans, ever restless, sought greater access to Zaltari knowledge, while the Zaltari viewed their human neighbors with wariness. Mistrust simmered beneath the surface, an unspoken divide between two species standing at the precipice of an unknown future. The Zaltari were a race that had endured the weight of time itself. They were ancient, yet they concealed much of their history, guarding their secrets with unwavering discipline. Their sleek, insectoid forms were encased in iridescent exoskeletons that shimmered with subtle hues, shifting in response to their emotions. Their eyes, large and multifaceted, reflected light in ways that made them seem almost unreadable to human observers. Their language was a complex symphony of clicking mandibles, melodic hums, and ultrasonic frequencies that human translators had only barely begun to decipher. Despite years of close contact, only a select few had ever been granted the privilege of direct communication with the Zaltari leadership. Most of their kind remained cloistered within their enclaves, organic fortresses that pulsed with an eerie, shifting light. These structures were more than just buildings. They were living organisms attuned to the thoughts and emotions of their inhabitants. Inside, the Zaltari worked tirelessly on advancements in biotechnology, engineering living constructs beyond human comprehension. To the Zaltari, humans were reckless pioneers expanding too quickly, tampering with forces they did not understand. Humanity's insatiable curiosity was both admirable and dangerous, and though they had permitted this fragile partnership, they watched with quiet, calculating eyes. Elias Carter had not come to Aegis 9 for wealth or conquest. He had come for knowledge. Once a military engineer, he had walked away from war and into the labyrinth of xenobiology and alien anthropology, desperate to understand what lay beyond the limits of human comprehension. His fascination with the Zaltari was boundless, though it often led to frustration. Their technology was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Organisms engineered to serve as tools, weapons, even entire cities. Yet, despite his years of study, the Zaltari remained an enigma, revealing only what they chose to share. Caught between two worlds, Elias found himself isolated. To the humans, he was too sympathetic to the aliens, too willing to accept their cryptic ways. To the Zaltari, he was still just another human, an outsider who did not belong. His only meaningful connection to the Zaltari was through his neighbor Varesh, a figure of intrigue and suspicion among both species. Varesh was unlike any other Zaltari Elias had encountered. While most of his kind remained detached, bound by the rigid customs of their society, Varesh was an outlier. A scientist, a researcher, perhaps even a heretic by his own species' standards. His home was a fortress of secrecy, its walls shifting like muscle tissue, covered in bioorganic veins that pulsed with energy. No one knew what experiments he conducted inside, only that they were of great importance and perhaps great danger. Despite living side by side for years, Elias had only exchanged words with Varesh on rare occasions. The Zaltari spoke in riddles, his cryptic warnings often dismissed as paranoia. But tonight, Varesh's silence would break, and Elias would finally understand the weight of the secrets the Zaltari had long kept hidden. It started as a subtle distortion, rippling across the sky like a reflection on disturbed water. The bioluminescent glow of the Zaltari structures flickered, dimming in a way that made even their most seasoned warriors pause in silent unease. Humans took notice next. Electrical systems glitched, comms sputtered with bursts of static, and across the colony, screens displayed nothing but blank distortion. Then, the sky itself seemed to ripple, and an unnatural energy pulsed through the atmosphere. The people of Aegis 9 watched in mounting dread as communication links to the rest of the human empire were severed. They were alone. Elias barely had time to process the growing disturbances before Varesh appeared at his doorstep, his bioluminescence flickering in a chaotic, erratic rhythm. His mandibles trembled as he uttered words no Zaltari had ever spoken. To a human before, stay inside. Do not open the door. Do not look outside, no matter what you hear. Elias had never seen a Zaltari express fear, but tonight, Varesh's voice carried a terror that sent ice through his veins. Across the colony, Zaltari enclaves went dark. Their organic structures shifted, hardening into defensive cocoons. Human settlers panicked as the last emergency. Broadcasts played on loop, repeating the same cryptic warning. Shelter in place. Do not engage. Elias hesitated, his mind warring between obedience and curiosity. Something terrible was coming, and he had no idea if Varesh's warning would be enough to keep him safe. The air vibrated with an unnatural hum, sending a wave of nausea through every living thing in the colony. It was a sound that defied explanation, a resonance that did not belong in this reality. Then, the screams began. Human and Zaltari alike. Brief, strangled cries, swallowed by an eerie chittering sound that grew louder with every passing second. Elias gripped the handle of his door, breath shallow, muscles locked in place. Outside, the world was changing, and something was coming for them all. Alarms blared through Aegis 9, their wailing tones blending with the rising screams of terrified colonists. The once thriving streets, a delicate balance of human and Zaltari cohabitation, now dissolved into chaos. The sharp hum of failing power grids echoed through the colony as streetlights flickered, illuminating a city in the throes of an unknown catastrophe. The ground trembled as distant explosions rippled through. The metallic corridors and hybrid biostructures, automated defenses sparked to life, their turrets swiveling toward unseen threats in the darkness, locking onto vague, shifting shadows that darted between buildings. A moment later, the colony's AI, typically an unwavering presence, crackled, with static-laden distortions before falling completely silent. The lack of its reassuring directives sent another wave of panic through the citizens, their frantic cries punctuated by the hollow clang of security shutters sealing entire sectors. Shut. Elias Carter sat frozen at his desk, gripping its edges as the low-frequency hum vibrated through the walls, sinking into his bones. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, an invisible force tightening around his skull, distorting the air itself. The temperature in his quarters seemed to drop, each breath a shallow whisper in the oppressive silence. His stomach churned, as his instincts screamed that something beyond human comprehension was unfolding. A strange, pulsing luminescence flickered outside his window. The Zaltari structures, usually attuned only to their kind, dimmed as though recoiling from an unseen force. Their smooth, organic exteriors trembled, shifting into defensive layers, the protective biomatter congealing into hardened chitin-like plating. The Zaltari knew something. They had anticipated this. Elias's pulse hammered in his ears. The colony was reacting. But to what? He took slow, deliberate steps toward his window, drawn by an inexplicable, terrible need to see what lay beyond. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to lock himself inside, to not look, but the human compulsion to understand, to know, overrode reason. His fingers trembled as he parted the blinds. His breath caught in his throat. Then he saw it. Shadows moved unnaturally. They did not slink across the ground like those cast by shifting lights, nor did they stretch in the predictable manner of figures illuminated by fire or glow. These shadows, twisted. They jerked and contorted, their shapes inconstant, their bodies pulling and bending as though controlled by something beyond mere physics. At first, Elias thought they were fleeing colonists, people scrambling for safety. But the longer he watched, the less human they became. The way their heads lolled, the manner in which their arms moved out of sync with their legs, these were not normal movements. These were the movements of something that no longer understood its own body. Their limbs shuddered, joints hyperextending, fingers twitching in unnatural spasms as they staggered forward, lost in a grotesque parody of motion. Some collapsed mid-step, writhing as if fighting their own skin. Others simply stood in place, mouths agape, eyes vacant, as though trapped between consciousness and something else entirely. Elias turned toward the Zaltari district, a sector that had always fascinated him. Tonight, however, it stood in eerie silence. The towering bioorganic structures, once so alive, now pulsed with dim, sickly light. Their organic glow had faded to an ashen hue, shifting sluggishly like a dying heartbeat. They had locked down, completely, sealing their entrances with thick, chitinous barriers, their neural pathways severed from the colony's grid. The Zaltari knew something. They had seen this coming. They had prepared. But for what? A sharp realization stabbed through Elias's gut. They weren't hiding from an enemy. They were hiding from their own past. Figures stumbled through the streets below, some collapsing, others writhing in place as if caught in an unseen grip. Their bodies shimmered in the artificial light, skin bulging and splitting in slow, horrific pulses. Then, under the flickering streetlights, he saw what had once been a human woman break apart. Not in death, but in transformation. Her bones stretched audibly, each segment elongating with a sickening crunch. Her skin rippled, a metallic sheen creeping across her flesh, veins bursting open to reveal something gleaming, liquid, and impossibly alive beneath. Something ancient had awakened, and it was rewriting them. A sharp voice, all too human, cut through the rising hysteria. "This is just another drill. We've had 100 of these damn alarms." The words carried the false confidence of someone who had lived through countless false alarms, someone who had convinced himself that nothing truly dangerous could ever happen here. Elias barely had time to turn his head before the foolish colonist stepped into the street. A middle-aged man, his posture stiff with irritation, strode forward as though he alone understood what was happening, as though the fear infecting the colony was nothing but overreaction. For a brief moment, there was silence. The flickering light stabilized, casting a weak but steady glow over the street. The man exhaled sharply, a smirk twitching at his lips, his confidence momentarily validated. Then, the street came alive. From the darkness beyond the colony's main plaza, something moved. It was fast, inhumanly fast. A blur of motion that didn't belong in the world Elias knew. The shadow lunged forward, a monstrous presence without form, without shape, striking with the speed of a predator honed by evolution far beyond human understanding. The colonist barely had time to react. A brief, choked gasp escaped his throat, but he didn't even have the chance to turn and run. Something wrapped around his face, clamping down with an unnatural grip, a grotesque appendage, neither flesh nor metal, its surface pulsing with veins of molten red, constricted over his skull with effortless strength. Then came the yank. He was pulled backward so suddenly, so violently, that his feet barely had time to leave the ground before he was ripped into the darkness. Elias staggered back from the window, horror locking his muscles in place. The streetlights flickered again, revealing something he wished he had never seen. The colonist was still alive. Barely. His body convulsed, flesh already in the process of being rewritten by something not of this world. His arms elongated, bones stretching beyond natural proportions, joints snapping and resetting in grotesque formations. His spine rippled, an unnatural glowing red fissure splitting down his back, pulsating as though it had become his new, alien heartbeat. The air filled with a sickening wet crack as his ribcage began to expand outward, the structure of his chest morphing into something unrecognizable, shifting metal fusing with muscle and sinew. His scream, once purely human, had shifted, warped, turning into something mechanical, something inhuman. And then the lights failed again. When they flickered back to life, the colonist was gone. Only a smear of blood and liquid metal remained. The lights flickered back on, stabilizing for a moment, casting harsh, sterile illumination over the ruined streets. Dozens of figures now filled the open spaces, moving with an eerie synchronicity that sent a primal shiver down Elias's spine. Their bodies were no longer their own. What had once been human in Zaltari was now something else entirely, something caught in the middle of a grotesque metamorphosis. Their skin, if it could still be called that, had fused with shifting plates of pulsating organic metal, seams of raw tissue visible between patches of unnatural plating. The glowing red fissures running across their forms pulsed like an exposed nervous system, flickering in sync with some unseen rhythm. They didn't stumble. They didn't lurch blindly like mindless husks. They moved with purpose. Their heads twitched at unnatural angles, scanning their surroundings, sensing rather than seeing. They were listening, not mindless, not lost. They were searching. One of them snapped its head toward a flickering streetlight, holding unnaturally still as though analyzing its glow, testing the change in energy. Another turned toward a motionless corpse lying near the colony's trade hub, crouching beside it in a disturbingly human gesture before digging its fingers into the flesh and peeling it open like a machine dissecting a faulty part. Elias felt the air leave his lungs, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. This wasn't just an outbreak. This wasn't some biological infection that had spiraled out of control. It was a directive. These creatures weren't random mutations. Something was turning them, guiding them. This wasn't an invasion. This was a conversion. Desperation gripped him as he lunged for his comms device, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped it. His fingers fumbled over the controls as he cycled through every emergency channel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Silence. The usual hum of the colony's AI, the ever-present background noise of Aegis 9's automated systems, was gone. No automated alerts. No security dispatch. Nothing. The system was dark, dead in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Elias's pulse thundered in his ears as he flipped through channels again. A signal had to be out there. Someone had to be responding. The colony was still standing, at least for now, so why was there no response? His heart stuttered when a weak signal crackled through the static. Faint, distorted, but there. His fingers moved faster, isolating the frequency, amplifying the transmission. The signal stuttered, breaking apart in bursts of static, but then a voice, not human, Varesh's distress beacon. Elias sucked in a sharp breath as he strained to make out the transmission. The Zaltari scientist had locked himself away before this started. He had known something was coming. And now, as Elias listened to the faint, fragmented signal, two words emerged clearly from the garbled noise. Containment breach. The world around him seemed to tilt. Varesh had known. But how? Elias worked feverishly to decrypt Varesh's message, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps as his hands trembled over the console. The transmission was heavily distorted, layers of encrypted Zaltari code embedded within the fragmented signal. He manually adjusted the data filters, peeling away interference, forcing the message into something decipherable. Then, a phrase emerged, stark and undeniable. The architects have returned. The words slammed into him like a physical blow. The name meant nothing to him, and yet it carried a weight, a sense of something vast and ancient. as if the past itself had clawed its way out of oblivion to reclaim its place. The infected colonists, the biomechanical transformations, the red fissures glowing like molten veins. This wasn't a random outbreak. This wasn't chaos. This was deliberate. A sickening realization settled over Elias like a shroud. The Zaltari had lied. They had always known about the danger that slept beneath Aegis 9, about the remnants of whatever had come before. They had told humanity nothing of what truly lurked beneath the colony's foundations, because they had believed it would never wake up. They were wrong. And now, it was waking up. A deep, primal fear gripped him. If Varesh had sent this message, he was still alive. And that meant there were still answers to be found. But Elias wasn't safe. Not anymore. If he wanted to survive, he had one chance. He had to reach Varesh. But to do so, he had to cross a city that no longer belonged to him. The colony was unrecognizable. The once familiar skyline had been consumed, reshaped into grotesque spires of organic metal, twisting and stretching into the sky like jagged, unnatural tumors sprouting from the remnants of civilization. Where sleek, human-built towers once stood, living biomechanical structures had taken root, pulsing with alien energy as if the colony itself had been assimilated into something greater, something alive. The streets pulsed, bathed in an eerie bioluminescent glow, veins of crimson and blue energy flickering within the pavement, spreading outward like a circulatory system, feeding the infection that had claimed the city. Aegis 9 was no longer just a settlement, it was evolving. The infected were no longer the mindless husks they had once seemed. They moved with unsettling coordination, no longer individuals, but extensions of a singular will. Their bodies, now, more biomechanical than flesh, merged and reformed, limbs stretching, spines contorting, organs fusing with synthetic plating, their forms mutating to serve a greater function. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were infrastructure. Some had become walking fortresses, while others merged into massive, shifting constructs, their bodies becoming bridges, barriers, and weapons in service of an intelligence beyond comprehension. Elias, Varesh, and their small team pushed forward through the decaying streets. Captain Mira O'Connell, her rifle clutched tight, scouted ahead with a soldier's precision, her eyes scanning for threats she knew were already watching them. Tal Kir, the Zaltari diplomat, moved hesitantly, his once proud stance faltering under the weight of revelations that had shattered his understanding of history. Sin 42, the rogue AI, remained unreadable, its artificial mind processing the unfolding catastrophe through a lens of cold logic. Every step was a battle against the city itself. Walls shifted, passageways collapsed, entire structures twisted into unnatural shapes, blocking their path, forcing them into deadly bottlenecks. Aegis 9 was fighting them, resisting them, as if aware of their intent. The infection had spread beyond just flesh. It had consumed the city's infrastructure, repurposing it into a battlefield of its own design. They were running out of time. If they didn't reach the reactor soon, there would be nothing left. Not of Aegis 9, not of humanity. Only the architect's will would remain. Tension boiled beneath the surface, the fragile alliance between the survivors beginning to splinter under the weight of the truth. The mission was simple: reach the reactor, deploy the pulse, stop the architects. But their motivations, their fears, and their deeply ingrained loyalties threatened to tear them apart before they could even get there. Captain Mira O'Connell, her jaw clenched tight, her rifle never straying far from her grip, was the first to break the silence. "We do what we have to." Her voice was steel, her conviction unwavering. "If it comes down to us or them, humanity comes first." Varesh stiffened beside her, but it was Tal Kir who responded first. "Us or them?" The Zaltari's mandibles clicked in frustration, his luminous exoskeleton dimming in distress. "What of the Zaltari who have fought beside you? Bled beside you? Are we not worth saving?" Mira's lip curled in a bitter smirk. "I've seen what this infection does. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't negotiate. The moment we hesitate, The moment we prioritize anything other than stopping this, we lose. And I don't intend to lose. Talkir's hands clenched at his sides, his form trembling with something between fury and helplessness. The return of the architects meant something far worse for his people than simple extinction. It meant they had never truly been free. It meant the rebellion was meaningless, that the architects had never truly been destroyed, merely waiting for the moment to reclaim what was once theirs. And now Talkir had to decide, stand with the humans or accept the fate his creators had set for him. CN-42, the rogue AI, remained motionless, analyzing the exchange with eerie detachment. Perhaps, it mused, its voice smooth, calculated, inhuman. Resistance is illogical. Perhaps this was always the intended outcome. If the architects created you both, then your conflict is simply another phase of their grand design. Mira's grip tightened around her rifle. I don't take orders from ghosts. CN-42's cold synthetic optics flickered. A shame, you were designed to. The argument grew heated, emotions clashing against reason. But Elias couldn't afford this. He pushed forward, ignoring their rising voices. Whatever awaited them at the reactor wasn't going to wait for them to sort out their differences. It would decide for them. With every step toward the reactor core, the whispers in Elias's mind grew stronger. At first, they were just fragmented thoughts, half-heard murmurs, distant echoes bleeding through the veil of time. He had dismissed them, chalked them up to stress, fatigue, or the side effects of the infection's proximity. But as they moved deeper into the heart of Aegis 9, those whispers became something else. Voices, distinct, clear, impossible. They didn't come from the infected. They came from something older. The architects were speaking. To him, Elias staggered mid-step, gripping his head as a sharp pulsing pain radiated through his skull. The whispers layered over each other, an overlapping chorus of ancient words, their meanings shifting even as he struggled to comprehend them. They weren't just talking. They were remembering, and so was he. Ahead, the infected convulsed, then straightened in eerie unison. Their twitching, erratic movements were gone. They had synchronized. Their bodies, already twisted into biomechanical monstrosities, shimmered as though stabilizing. They were no longer individuals. They were one. Then they spoke. Their voices came as a single, perfect resonance, reverberating through the air, through the structures, through Elias's own mind. You were always meant to return. The word struck him like a tidal wave, deep, ancient, yet disturbingly familiar. Elias's vision fractured, not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from revelation. He saw fragments of the past, glimpses of history woven into his very being. The birth of the architects, their vast, impossibly advanced empire stretching across the stars, shaping galaxies with their will. They had created perfect civilizations, species designed to terraform, to build, to maintain the balance of existence itself. Then, the Zaltari rebellion, the war that shattered worlds, the downfall of the architects, and then, humanity. Elias gasped, the breath torn from his lungs. It was never a coincidence. Humanity's arrival on Aegis 9 hadn't been an accident. The architects had left something behind, something woven into the fabric of their creations, something meant to continue, their purpose when the time was right, and now it was waking up inside him. The reactor chamber was vast, stretching beyond what the eye could fully perceive, its walls throbbing with raw energy, pulsating in sync with something ancient and waiting. Towering conduits lined the chamber, feeding power into the central core, which glowed with an intensity that seemed almost alive. The team stepped forward, their boots echoing against the metallic floor, the weight of the moment crushing down upon them. But as they approached the final threshold, Elias staggered. His knees buckled beneath him, hands clawing at the ground as his mind fractured under the weight of revelation. He saw it all now, a flood of visions, memories that weren't his but had always been there. buried deep inside him, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The puzzle pieces that had eluded him finally clicked into place. The architects had designed humanity. They had not been born of chance, of survival, of sheer will. They had been crafted, molded, shaped with purpose. Their resilience, their ingenuity, their defiance, all of it was engineered. The ultimate experiment, and they were never the first. The Zaltari had been the first attempt. A species created not to rule but to shape worlds, to terraform, to build. But something within them had rejected their purpose. They had seen the architects for what they were, not gods but masters, and they had rebelled. And when they did, the architects started again. Elias gasped, a shudder running through him. Humanity was the backup plan. The voice inside his mind, the voice that had whispered since the moment the architects had begun to wake, spoke again. "You are not our enemy," it whispered, its tone almost reverent. "You are our future." Elias looked up, saw the others staring at him, their faces contorted in a mixture of confusion and horror. They knew. Even without words, they knew. If they activated the shockwave pulse, it would do more than stop the architects. It would sever the link permanently. Humanity would never become what they were meant to be. They would never ascend. The team stood at the precipice of fate, the weight of their decision pressing down upon them like the gravity of a collapsing star. The shockwave pulse was armed, its dormant energy humming within the reactor's core, waiting for the final command. A single choice would decide the future, not just of humanity, not just of the Zaltari, but of what they were meant to become. But activating it meant more than just stopping the architects. It meant severing something deeper, something that had been ingrained in their very existence since the beginning. It meant permanently altering humanity and Zaltari DNA. Mira's fingers tightened around her rifle, knuckles white from the pressure. Her stance was rigid, every muscle coiled with conviction. "We end this now," she said, her voice like iron, her gaze fixed on the console that would unleash the pulse. "Humanity stays free." Talkir hesitated, mandibles twitching in uncertainty. His kind had fought for independence from their creators long before the first human had set foot on Aegis 9. But had their rebellion been a mistake? Had they doomed themselves to a life of imperfection when they had rejected the architect's will? Was this what they had been running from all along? Sin 42 remained motionless, its synthetic form humming with silent calculations. The rogue AI's voice was calm, neutral, yet somehow piercing. To resist is inefficient. The others turned toward it. "If humanity was designed to evolve," Sin 42 continued, "then why fight it?" Elias stood at the center of them all, his heart pounding, his mind fracturing beneath the weight of truth. The whispers still called, to him, murmuring not in conquest, but in promise. The architects weren't trying to destroy them. They were offering completion, a return to purpose, a future without uncertainty. But at what cost? Elias stepped forward, his breath shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs like a war drum. Two paths lay before him. One was written in his DNA, embedded in the very fibers of his existence, a purpose etched into his species long before they had even known themselves. The other was a path forged by defiance, a road carved not by fate but by choice, by the very willpower that had set humanity apart from every creation before it. The voices of the architects surged in his mind, smooth and unwavering, resonating with something ancient inside him. "You are meant for more." Elias clenched his fists, his mind warring against the revelation, against the part of him that knew the architects were right, the part of him that felt the pull toward completion, the tantalizing offer of becoming what they were meant to be. But then he thought of Earth. He thought of humanity's history, of wars fought and lost, of battles waged against overwhelming odds, of empires that had risen and fallen not because they were programmed to do so, but because humans had always made their own choices, flawed, painful, but truly theirs. Humanity had not survived because They were perfect. They had survived because they refused to be controlled, because they had fought, not for ascension, not for purpose, but for the right to be imperfect, to be uncertain, to be free. His fingers hovered over the console. A single press, a single choice. A deep breath. Elias activated the pulse. The shockwave pulse erupted outward, an invisible force tearing through the city, its energy crackling through the air like a thunderclap of unseen destruction. It spread through every street, every corridor, every structure, cutting through the living tendrils of the architect's influence, unraveling their hold on the world in an instant. The infected froze, their bodies jerking violently, locked in a final, unnatural seizure. The pulsating red fissures that had once coursed through their twisted forms flashed, flickered, then dimmed, their alien glow fading into nothingness. Then, one by one, they collapsed. What had once been human, Zaltari, and something else entirely crumpled like puppets with severed strings. Their fused limbs twitched for only a moment, mechanical tendrils spasming, curling inward like withering vines before falling completely still. The towering biomechanical constructs, those twisted, grotesque monuments to the architect's will, began to fracture, their structures disintegrating into dust, unable to exist without the force that had animated them. Aegis 9 stood in eerie silence. No voices, no screams. Just the hollow, suffocating quiet of a city that no longer lived. The once thriving colony was now a graveyard, its once living structures of organic metal unraveling, the twisting towers and shifting streets crumbling like brittle husks, their unnatural cohesion dissolving into ruin. Elias stumbled forward, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, the crushing weight of what he had done pressing down on his chest. He had severed the architect's hold, but had he saved anyone? The infected were dead. The colony was dying. Was this a rescue or an extermination? The silence gave him no answers. Only emptiness. From the shattered remnants of the colony, the survivors began to emerge, crawling out from the ruins like ghosts of a world that no longer existed. Wounded, traumatized, forever changed. They stumbled through the debris, their eyes hollow, their bodies trembling, their movements slow and uncertain, as if they weren't sure if they were still alive, or if they had simply been left behind in the architect's wake. Some clutched at wounds, their injuries more than just physical. Some had lost family, others had lost themselves. None would walk away from Aegis 9, untouched. Varesh lay among the rubble of what had once been his research enclave, his bioluminescence flickering weakly, a dying ember barely holding on. His exoskeleton was cracked and fading, his form smaller than it had ever seemed before. He did not cry out. He did not move. He simply stared into the dust-filled sky, unmoving. The Zaltari were a species built on order, on history, on knowledge. They had stood against time itself, surviving where other civilizations had faded. They had been the first to rebel, the first to reject the architects, and yet all of it lay in ruin. The once proud enclaves, symbols of their technological and biological mastery, were nothing but broken shells now, their luminous structures fractured beyond repair. Their civilization had survived for eons, and yet, in a single night, they had lost more than they could ever rebuild. But the humans were no better. Elias could feel it in his own bones, an ache that was not pain, but something deeper, something written into the very fabric of his being. The pulse had done more than just stop the architects. It had changed them. Not just humanity, not just the Zaltari. Everyone. Shift, unseen, but inescapable. A scar, not just in their minds, not just in the ruins around them, but in their DNA itself. Whatever they had been before, they weren't anymore. Something had altered. Something had awakened. And no one, not Elias, not Varesh, not any of the survivors, would ever be the same again. Elias felt something stir within him, something that had nothing to do with exhaustion or fear. It was deeper, more profound, a shift in the very foundation of his being. Something had changed. He lifted a trembling hand to his temple, expecting to feel nothing, only the lingering weight of battle, the hollow ache of survival. But as his fingers pressed against his skin, he felt it. A pulse, not a heartbeat, not a physical sensation, but something deeper. A hum beneath his flesh, a vibration in his very cells, a whisper in his blood. The architects were gone. Their hold had been severed, their grand design shattered, and yet they had not completely vanished. Elias's mind flashed with images, disjointed and fragmented, half-remembered blueprints of machines that had never been built, visions of lost worlds, remnants of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity had even learned to dream of the stars, knowledge that was never his to begin with. Yet, he understood it, as if it had always been there. The symbols, the intricate designs, the complex workings of technologies far beyond human comprehension. They swam in his thoughts, waiting, lurking, demanding to be recognized. What else had the architects left behind? What had they hidden within him? Elias exhaled sharply, his fists clenching as his body trembled, not from fear but from realization. Was humanity still evolving? Not in the way the architects had intended, not as their perfect creations. But something inside him whispered that the process wasn't over. They had severed the chains, but had they changed the destination, or merely the path? Mira, Tyalkir, and Sin 42 stared at Elias, their faces unreadable, their silence more profound than any words could have been. Had he saved them, or had he changed them forever? The colony was dead, its twisted, biomechanical, spires now lifeless husks, its streets reduced to a silent graveyard of what once was. But they were still here. For better or worse, they had survived. Mira wiped the blood from her forehead, her usual fire dampened but not extinguished. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something, to acknowledge what had happened, to declare victory, to rationalize the impossible. But in the end, there were no words. There was nothing left to say. Talkir turned his gaze upward to the night sky above. Something felt different. The vast emptiness that had once stretched across the cosmos, a canvas of endless possibility, now carried weight, a presence. As though the universe itself had shifted. As though something unseen was watching them from the darkness beyond. The architects may have been destroyed. But were they truly gone? Sin 42's optics flickered, scanning Elias, running calculations, trying to make sense of what he had become. The AI's voice, calm and emotionless, broke the silence. You are not the same. It tilted its head slightly, observing the others, before adding, none of us are. The dust settled, the ruins of Aegis 9 standing in eerie stillness. Elias felt it, deep inside, a weight, a whisper, a remnant of something vast and unfinished. The architects had planned for every possibility. Even this one, and now whatever they had left behind, it was inside him. Beyond the ruined colony of Aegis 9, drifting silently through the void, a deep space probe continued its lonely patrol. Its antennae scanned the darkness, relaying nothing but static, an echo of a world that no longer existed. For years, it had served its purpose. A relic of an era before the fall, before the battle that had severed the past from the future. Then, something changed. An incoming transmission, encoded, unstable, ancient. A signal pulsing from a location beyond mapped space. The probe's AI stuttered, struggling to process the sheer complexity of the data. Symbols, patterns, mathematical impossibilities flooded its core, rewriting protocols that had been untouched for decades. Its lights flickered. Fail-safes activated, then failed. The probe shuddered as the message began to decipher itself. Not in language, not in sound, but in fragments of something greater. A pulse of knowledge meant for something or someone.